Hey, welcome back, fellow alchemist. If you have been watching the series, because this is lesson 1.4, if you don't know what lessons are, it's basically just a series on n8n automation, how to think about automation, how to get started with n8n. In the previous videos, we spoke about n8n, um, what it is, its history, how to get started, how to set it up. And now we're going to be talking about how we can actually start thinking about building our first workflow. Now, this is going to be a two-part thing. So, at first, we're going to be like thinking about building these workflows, and then we're going to actually like build it next time. So, look forward to that. But for now, you actually just need to sort of switch your thinking to a different angle. I'm going to explain how to think about things. I'm going to explain all this. So just like understand that that's effectively just what we're going to be doing. So understand one thing, and this isn't some metaphysical bullshit. Okay, this is just me being honest in general. Great automations start in your mind. So once you once you are able to, like I've said this before, once you're able to break down a sequence of events into like sequential steps, basically, if you can automate it all, right? Once you're able to break down sort of like a whole process into a sequence, you can break it down and turn it into an automation. So yeah, um, this is the main principle, which is this idea of being able to break things down is so crucial. And today we're stepping into this world where we're turning ideas into automations. So for one thing, before you start, you need a plan, right? You need a real plan, and it's not just like you don't just put notes together, right? You need a certain outcome that you're going for, and then you need a plan, step by step plan that you can use to get to that outcome. So first things first, you have to shift how you think, like as I said before, right? Most people are just trained to do tasks. So most people maybe do jobs, right? You have this one single task and then you just do it and then you're done, right? You just do it and you're done. But if you're an automation specialist, what you need to start doing, what you need to start thinking, is how to solve problems, right? Like a recent client of mine came to me. They wanted a way to build a campaign for like fundraising. They wanted to do fundraising for their AI sort of project, and they wanted me to come up with a campaign for that. And that's exactly what I did. I used a workflow to generate these sort of daily social media posts for Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And then I also generated images and video for them with Placid and Haitian, right? And all of that wouldn't have been possible if I didn't think about sort of this first thing. I didn't think about how to actually design these kinds of systems. You're not just doing a task, you're designing a system that does a task effectively. So in a way, you have to stop thinking like an employee and start thinking like a designer of an employee. Do you understand me? You probably do. Right. So every kind of task can be broken down into a kind of like thing that an employee does. They send in emails, they check analytics, they move data, they respond, react, and repeat. But as an automator, right, you're not a worker, right? You're a systems architect. So you need to check. You need to ask yourself like, what's repetitive here? Like, what's the process? What's the predictable thing that will probably happen next? And how can I make how can I make this machine do it for me? Right. Also, something that's really helped me out is this fact that the more you automate, the more time you have for strategy and creativity. And this was so true because like I used to be super active on X and LinkedIn, and then like I was like I can't keep doing this, right? Because it would take me maybe a few hours a day to do this, right? So to post on LinkedIn just to generate more traction for my branding, right? So what I chose to do instead was to take my Substack articles, to sort of condense them into these value-packed little things that push people towards my Substack. And then I create an automation around that. And then I have that running so that it's scheduled to post something every day at a certain time. And this has been helping me gain Substack readers like on a consistent basis as well. And it's been helping me gain followers on X. Like I haven't sort of taken X seriously for a long time now, but it's helping me gain followers on X, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, like the more time you have for like the more time you free up effectively, the more time you have to like focus on growing your business. And let's be honest, you also have time for living your life, which is like probably the most important thing. So there's a 5-step workflow planning formula, and if I was to simplify it, it would be something like you identify the trigger, you list out the steps, you test the points, you define the output, and then you check recurrence or loops, right? So step 1 is identifying the trigger. What starts the process? So think about whatever you're trying to automate. So I'll give you an example. You want to, every time an email comes in, you want to label it, and then you want to say, and then you want to also draft a response email if it's useful in whatever use case. So the start of that would be the reception of an email, right? In another case, you might be designing a workflow where every time someone submits a form, you get all that data and then you put it in a Google Sheet where you can start using it in a more, useful manner. That first thing, that trigger, would be the form submission. Maybe think about it in terms of e-commerce, like what we spoke about in lesson 1.2. By the way, you should probably go watch that. Where like if a new order comes in on your page, on your Shopify, and you have connecting workflows that track all of this, and then they track your inventory, and then they can like subtract from your inventory and like give you alerts whenever you have like missing inventory and so on and so forth. That first order is going to be the trigger, right? So this is the first domino that falls in the workflow, right? It's the thing that starts everything else. Next thing, you have to list out the steps, right? What needs to happen next, right? You break it down into these bite-sized actions, like I just did with the email flow, right? If I was designing something like an email labeling and response drafting system, it would be the email trigger. It would be something that reads the email content and then sort of declares what kind of label it needs to put on it. And then it would be the labeling actions that actually label it. And then depending on the label, it would be a drafting response that then gets sent back to the email. Like 5 steps. It sounds very simple, but realistically it would probably have more steps, because that's just what it takes to do something realistically. Like it always takes more time and resources to build something in reality. But if you can plan it out in your mind like this, that's the perfect first step. So think about it. If this happens, then do this, then do this. Like it has to be sequential steps that are logical and doable in the workflow. Step 3 is to test the points. And this is where you ask yourself, like, what part of this workflow is fragile? Like, what do you need to make sure of to make sure everything is running perfectly? Do you need some kind of fallback logic? And there's a ton of fallback logic nodes that you can use, like the wait node, the stop and error node, so on and so forth. You even have like webhook response nodes and so on and so forth. So one thing you'll find with n8n is that there is a lot of problematic things that could happen, especially when you're running data through your workflow. Like when I'm talking data, I mean binary data. So you downloaded something like images or videos and you want to send them through. It's kind of difficult to do that. Something else you probably notice is that if you have loops, if you want to call something, maybe something that was in the loop or something outside, like before the loop, you'll have to use a certain kind of different way to call it. Something else you might notice is that certain nodes give you two different outputs based on the requirements that they give you. So they might give you certain different sort of ways of like packaging the information. Like I know for Airtable, it either gives you just the .json dot whatever you want, but it could also give you .json dot fields dot whatever you want. So you have to like make special ways to like deal with that in your code, which is like really something important that you need to figure it out. You need to figure out. So this is all just fallback logic, something you need to think about in step 3. So step 4 is about defining your output. What do you want to happen at the end? So in our email labeling thing, what we wanted to do was to draft emails, or to either like send like a useful thing might be to send a message. But if you're getting messages every time someone labels an email, it's not useful. It's not really that useful. Maybe an even more useful thing is to have a personalized report get sent in at the end of the day. So after labeling all these emails, then you could put all of the labeled, sort of like the labeled messages in a sort of sheet, and then populate that sheet, and then at the end of the day you can have a response sort of created from that sheet, where it gets sent to maybe your Telegram or your WhatsApp or whatever, telling you that, hey, I got these emails, these are your emails that came in today, and this is what I did with them. I labeled them so and so and so on, and I even drafted these things with links to the email drafts. So yeah, like you could do Slack messages, Google Sheet rows, like you could do anything. Like the idea here is, if you're the one designing the flow, then you have the power. But if it's a client that's telling you what needs to happen, then you still have the power. Like there are a ton of integrations that you could manage with APIs. There's a ton of internal things that you could do as well. But you have to understand that at the end of a workflow, there's always something useful that happens. In a previous video, I showed you guys a workflow that generates HeyGen videos. That has something useful that happens at the end, where it generates a sort of document that contains the description, so the video description, and then also contains the link to the actual video. That link is the one that anyone could use to download the video from the internet and then post it. That's what I sent over to my business partner, who is the one who's managing the accounts and doing all the really fun stuff with the customers. So step 5 is, you check recurrence or loop. So is there a loop? Does this run on some kind of schedule? Right, like my X posting workflow, that runs on a schedule. It runs every time at I think it's 2 p.m. or 12 p.m. I'm not entirely sure, because that's just how long I've left it open. All I do is update my Substack articles in an Airtable base, and it just keeps pulling from the Substack articles. I'm going to expand it, so I'm going to have it start running on a certain schedule and sort of doing multiple posts per day instead of just one, which is something very exciting. I might show you how I get that done, but yeah. Should it reset or stack? So this is also very useful when you think about sometimes you're doing HTTP requests, but those HTTP requests, they take too long, so they give you something like a way to sort of query the status of the process that's running in the server, whether it's image generation or video generation or anything like that. A useful thing you could do is have a loop that effectively just keeps looping around and around, trying to get the status of the generation or whatever. And once it gets the status, it's able to download the video in the next process outside the loop. You do that with a bunch of ifs, and you can just connect the loop. Again, these are all concepts that I'll show you. They're very useful concepts. So yeah, once you've mapped all of these out, step 1 to step 5, now it's actually time to kind of plan things out. You can kind of bring it to life in n8n. So let me give you a quick example to show you how this works in a different way. So imagine you're doing a content workflow where you have a trigger that's a new YouTube video that's published. What you do is you want to grab the video title and the link. You want to format a message. So you want to like say, for this you might use something like OpenAI node that effectively prompts a model and tells it to like give you some kind of social media post that you could put on Twitter or LinkedIn. You could use this to like, and then later on you'd use that message along with the link. You post all of those to Twitter and LinkedIn, I guess you would say X in this case, and then you'd go ahead and you'll put all of that in your email list as well. So this is like really useful, but at the end of the day, those are just the steps. Now you have to think about step 3, which is the test points. Like, where could things start failing? You could have API rate limits for YouTube. You could have character limits, because like token limits for like what you allow or what your whatever you're trying to allow for the formatting of the message with like OpenAI or any other AI source you're using. You could be using like OpenRouter or Microsoft Azure Foundry or like anything else. There's a ton of them out there right now, and all of them are using the same kinds of like formulas for this. So there's a lot of points where things could break. Once you figure those out, you figure out the output. So the output here is effectively just the platforms get updated with your new content that you just posted on YouTube. And then yeah, that's basically it. It's very cool, you know. And the recurrence here is the fact that this only happens when a new video is detected, meaning that you don't actually have loops inside your thing unless you define them within the sort of aspect of whatever you're trying to design. But this happens every time a new video is detected in your YouTube account. So yeah, now you would have a skeleton of a workflow, which is really like exciting, and all just from defining 5 steps, which is just the trigger, the steps, the test points, the outputs, and the recurrence. With these 5 steps, you'll have like a real way of thinking about automation and starting to like build real shit, real cool shit. So I'm going to skip a step here because like after you plan things out, it's obviously like the build phase, but like I'm going to skip the build phase because that's the part that we're actually going to cover in the next video. What I'm going to talk about now is how to actually start testing things out after you've built them. One thing you need to do, or rather actually this is something you need to do during your build phase, is you need to test things out one node at a time. Now this can get tricky if you have like a loop again, because loops require sort of running processes. You can't test things out one at a time with a loop, which is kind of sad if you think about it, but you know, again, it is what it is. n8n has a tendency of like sort of whenever your workflow is like data intensive, where it's like when it's juggling too much JSON data or when it's like too much binary data, it tends to like have a difficulty sort of maintaining itself. So yeah, testing one node at a time helps you sort of not only define the inputs to the next nodes, but to define, like, to see whether the outputs from this node is something that's actually working out for you, something that you actually want. So you can test nodes individually, and yeah, don't run the whole thing unless each piece is working. And this is also useful for you if you're running n8n.io in the cloud, right? So you only have a certain number of set executions that you can run, and once you hit that limit, it's over for you, like you're cooked. So you just need to test one node at a time. That's something everyone does. It's something I do as well. And yeah, another thing you probably need to do is you need to use fake test data, right? You need to start using the sort of like something I do normally is either I have like real data that I actually want to run on, or I create just an Airtable base with fake data, right? So I just use this to run the workflow, and you don't want to sort of run this with bad information or anything like that. So think about it in the case of like the example that we just spoke of, where you're posting on social media. The test data there would be just a video, like a simple video with a simple description on YouTube. It could just be like a few second video of you saying, hey, this is a test. And that's just like all the test data that it actually needs. You want to see if things work out. So if your video gets detected, if your video upload gets detected, then things are working out for you and you're on the right track. So yeah. Another thing you need to do is, you'll probably see this when we start building things out. There is the editor, sort of like the editor page on n8n, which is where you build, and then there's the executions tab as well, which is where you can see all the previous executions that you've done before. You can use that page to check out like all the different executions that you've done, and this is useful for say hypothetically you've been having a workflow and it was running sort of like all by itself, it was active. You can check previous executions, like what kind of data they ran through, and n8n, it saves all the like previous instances of data, and that way you can, like, if there's ever an error, you can debug it like really well. You know, you can sort of take that errored data, you can input it into your actual like editor, and then it will pin the data, and that way you can just run tests on it again and again, adjust, and then, you know, figure things out from them. Another thing is you can set breakpoints. So this is very useful. What you can do is you can put like a wait node whenever you don't want, like you want to check the execution data from the previous steps before moving on. So you can just have it wait for like 5 minutes, and then while it's waiting you check the data that's coming through, and if the data is like correct, then you can just push it through. There are other nodes for this as well. It's like there's a node that actually requires human input. It stops the workflow and it like requires human input, so you can go in and check again. The wait node is just another useful one. There's a ton of useful nodes, so yeah, you can test like for all types of logic, like branches, filters, transformations, and so on and so forth. And then finally, once everything is working, you can celebrate, because yeah, you've turned something repetitive, probably some repetitive task, into a workflow that you can just plug and play and use, maybe give to other people as a service. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, to wrap up, right, you plan first and you build second, right? You need to think in terms of triggers, steps, outputs, testing points, and recurrences, and then you need to generally test things out while you're planning, while you're building them. So test things out one node at a time to figure out the inputs and the outputs of each node and whether they're actually in the right form. And then what you want to do is you want to deploy it, right? You want to start using this. You want to send this out to people who will use it. In the next video, we're going to take that to the next step, and we're actually going to build something that you can see in the n8n editor. And I might run you through the n8n editor just like in a simple overview format. I'm not going to baby you through this. Like, I think you're like intelligent enough to sort of understand things all by yourself. So it's just going to be a simple overview, and then we're just going to run through a simple workflow that anyone can build in the shortest amount of time. So after this, you would have gone from a task doer to an automation thinker, right? You're not just thinking in terms of tasks, you're actually building systems that do tasks for you. Now, this is your time, right? You've effectively just, as long as you can use these systems that you've learned, you can start leveling up the way you think. See you in the next lesson, Dear Alchemist.